Good afternoon and welcome to 365 Days of Amazing Stories with Theo Mayer. Here we are on day 233. The truth is, I've let a couple of days go by and haven't told stories. So I need to make 3 stories up in one day. Why? Because I'm here in Kathmandu, Nepal, getting panchakarma. And I have to say, it really is serious business. It's not easy because it is a incredible cleanse, huge purging, I would say, and a rebalancing of the physiology, ancient wisdom. And so here I am, and I'll do my best to keep going with these stories from 1001 Arabian Nights. This story is the story that the tailor began to tell, because, as you might remember, those 4 men, were trying to keep from getting hung by the king. And the only way they could get out of it was to tell a better story than the story of the adventure of the hunchback. So the tailor, he came up and he addressed the king. "O King of the ages, let me tell you this story about the lame young man from Baghdad." He said, "Now, this happened to me just the night before I met the hunchback. I was invited to a dinner by one of my very good friends. And when I got there, there were another, 15 or 20 of my dearest companions. My friend had made an incredible banquet for all of us. And just as we had gathered, our host came in, leading with him a very beautiful and handsome young man. As handsome as any I think I've ever seen. And he had one flaw, which was he was lame in one leg. He came in and we all greeted each other in the fairest of ways. Until, when we were all about to sit down, and many of us already had, he turned and he looked toward the end of the table. And he stopped. And he turned and began to make his way to the door. And our host caught up with him and said, "Why, when you just come to my house, are you leaving?" The man said, "Don't hinder me. Don't hinder me. For I must go. I must go." "What is it?" said the host. "There's that man sitting at the end of the table. I have sworn that I will not sit with him, dine with him. I will not even live in the same city with him for as long as I live. For it is he who has caused me to be lame the way that I am. No, I shall not stay. I am going." And he again began to walk to the door, but the host took him by the arm, turned him and said, "You must tell us. What is the story?" "If you must, I will tell you the story of that uncouth, blabber-mouthed, meddling barber that sits at the end of your table, and you will know, all of you, why it is that I stand here in the condition that I am in. Please then, sit and tell us." "If I must." So he sat down and we collected around him our chairs barber, though, he sat at the end of the table, and all of us began to feel an aversion toward him. He drooped his head and seemed to turn pale. And then the young man began. My father was a very, very wealthy man in Baghdad. And, well, I was his only son. And when he died, he left me a great amount of wealth. I could live quite easily in luxury. Now, just so happened that, as chance would have it, I just grew up not liking women at all. It was almost a hatred of women. I carried this with me for many a year. One day I was strolling through the streets when a band of men came, intent on robbing me. They began to close in on me, and I ran. I ran fast and I ran hard. They could not keep up. I turned down a blind alleyway. There was no escaping from the end of it. But the men had quit chasing me, and I was a little bit out of breath, so I sat down, gathered myself. As I did, a window opened above me, a little ways down from the street. The most beautiful young woman. She stuck half her body out that window and began to tend some flowers that were hung just outside the window. And I will tell you, in that very moment, I went from hating women to loving them. I'd never seen any woman as beautiful as she was. And as I stood there, enraptured by her beauty, she turned her gaze toward me and smiled. And I smiled back. She finished what she was doing with the flowers, turned again and looked at me, waved, and then went back into the room that she was in, closing the windows after her. I sat there. How long I sat there? Well, I sat there until I was brought out of my stupor by hoofbeats. Riding toward me was the head judge of Baghdad, riding a she-mule. He tied up the animal there in front of the house. He entered. A servant came out and led the she-mule away. And in he went, closing the door behind him. The judge. I assumed then that the woman that I had seen must be his daughter. I went home. And as I did, I could only think of her. My thoughts were completely wrapped up in her. Well, I got home and I went to my room and I laid down. I hardly slept that night. I could hardly eat the next day, or the next, and my relatives, of course, they worried about me greatly. They asked me what was the matter. I could not really respond to them and tell them. And this went on till they were worried sick and shedding tears over me. They called for a doctor, and the doctor looked at me and could find nothing really wrong. And finally, one day, an old woman came into my home. She looked at me, and she immediately knew what was wrong with me. She began to recite some verses. It was as if she was reciting poetry about a lost lover and a man enraptured by a beautiful woman and unable to live without her, and on she went with these beautiful lines and poetry. I sat up. She said, "Son, tell me, what is it that ails you? Who is it?" Well, seeing that she saw more in me than anyone had, I told her my story. She said, "Huh, that is the judge's daughter, and she is kept strictly away from everyone. Where you saw her, that is her private room. I'm friends with the family, and I know her well. You will not anyway be able to get to her except through me. But I will do everything I can to help you, to see her, to know her. I will help you," she said. Well, this re-enlivened me, as you can only imagine, and I sat up, and for the first time in days, I felt hungry. Downstairs I went, the old woman accompanying me. I called to my servants, and they quickly began to prepare food for me, and everyone was happy to see me up and about. The old woman, she whispered in my ear, "I shall be back." She went on her way. She took with me all my hope. We'll stop the story there, as Scheherazade did. What can that old woman do for this poor young man? We will see. We will see.